Welcome to the HAYVN Hubcast, a place to learn what business leaders, owners, and professionals are doing to navigate and grow in today's market. Hear from industry experts on everything from marketing, leadership, financing, and more. Brought to you by HAYVN, a co-working space where you can connect, create, and get stuff done.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the HAYVN Hubcast. I'm your host, Nancy Sheed, and I am so interested and excited to get to chat today with Lutonya Russell-Humes. Welcome, Lutonya.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
100%. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So Lutonya is the Vice President of Grants and Programs at Fairfield County Community Foundation. And I'm dying to dive into more about the foundation as well as your current job, but let's take a step back. We were talking earlier. Before we dive into what you're doing now, I'd love to hear kind of your journey into how you got into this nonprofit world and grants and making the world a better place the way you do. Is this what you always wanted to do?
I don't know that I had the name for what I'm doing now, but I knew that actually, when I first went to college, my goal was to deliver healthy babies into the Mississippi Delta. So I was a chemistry pre-major, completely sold on, we had a really high infant mortality rate in the Mississippi Delta. It still does. And I wanted to be a part of bringing healthy babies into the world and caring for moms to be. I took a sociology course in college in my freshman year and immediately sort of fell in love with the idea of thinking about how we as individuals form society and looking at the ills of society from a much more global perspective. That became really exciting for me. So I changed my major, but I had no clue what that meant in terms of some kind of vocation or a career. But I was intrigued by thinking about these big things in big ways. I graduated college, moved to New York. I'm from Mississippi, obviously, and started to work in the foster care system. And
oh, my word.
That was really sort of where I thought, how do we help people heal families? And, parents make mistakes. And so how do we help them learn from those mistakes so that they can be better parents to their children? That was really something that sat with me. My sister had worked in the New York City foster care system before she moved to Texas. And after doing that for 10 years, I quickly realized, you know what? The system is not where you do the healing. You actually have to start before that. And that started my journey into community-based work.
Wow. And I mean, you went right into the frying pan with New York City foster care system. I'm sure there could be some other foster care systems. 10 years. I'm so impressed you made it 10 years. Holy moly.
Well, 2 of those years I spent in the state of Texas foster care system in San Antonio and Bexar County, Texas.
Wow. Okay. I'm sure you can also compare and contrast.
And not in the way that you might think, truth be told.
Wow. Okay, that's a whole nother podcast. So reflecting on that, the healing, it wasn't the system that was doing the healing. That was just almost a consequence of the healing that hadn't happened. When you say you shifted to the community work, what did that look like then to you in terms of how you were getting to families, or were there more impactful organizations you saw that were helping families heal?
In my mind, I was a systems person, so that it wasn't just one thing. These were families that were in crises because they were, at the end of the day, living in poverty. Very rarely, and I had the occasional exception, but most of the families that I had encountered were poor people who the parents themselves had come out of challenging circumstances, and then they had kids, and their circumstances became even more challenging because they had not been able to necessarily care for themselves, provide a steady and stable housing or access healthy foods or any foods in some instances. maintain employment, had been poorly educated. So they just were not equipped necessarily to raise the families that they had. And it's very easy for those of us who have quite a number of resources at our disposal to pass judgment on a mom or dad who literally go day to day trying to figure out how they might feed themselves and their families and where they might live. That takes a toll on your psyche. And of course, you may do some things as a parent that you otherwise wouldn't do. So for me, it was really about, so how do we still, who working with an organization, hopefully that was really tackling the poverty issue. And so my first job after the foster care system was exactly that, with a large anti-poverty organization. I live in Westchester, and it was at that time the largest anti-poverty organization in the county. And I ran a program for middle school students that was intended to follow them throughout high school, offered supports to their family, very sort of wraparound services oriented.
Right.
With a particular emphasis on trying to deal with teen pregnancy. And at that time, the little community that I was working in and I now live in had one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the county. I like to think that our program had a lot to do with bringing that rate down. But
wow.
It wasn't just our program. It was the collaboration that we had with so many other entities in the village that really supported families, supported young people, gave them healthy choices, and helped them to understand that they had options if they delayed. Not just so much about delaying sexual activity, that was part of it, but also definitely delaying parenthood.
Wow. How amazing to actually see your impact as opposed to, as you said before, with the foster care, where you were almost having to help people maintain or get through. In terms of that impact, and you mentioned collaboration, how does that work? And I'm sure that carries over into the work of the Community Foundation, but how do organizations work together in this situation and don't, not step on each other's toes and figure out who's helping at what stage, or which organization is the right one to be helpful? It truly takes a village, as you're sharing with us. But is that already decided? Is it a case-by-case basis? How does everybody stay in touch in terms of who's working on what? You could see a lot of people wanting to do good,
right?
But it's got to be organized so that it's actually effective, right?
Right. No, absolutely. So I like to think of good community work in the same way that I think of any relationship, right? Relationships are built and lost on trust. And so you build trust through communication, you build trust through actions. And this is very similar to sort of the work that I'm doing right now. But the idea is you maintain regular communication. We all agree on what the issue is, and then we come up with a strategy that we can agree upon. And to some degree, you sort of say, Organization A, we've seen you do these things, and that feels like that's really where your strengths lie. Is that something that you can bring to the table for this particular project? Or is there something else that you had in mind that you might bring to the table for that particular project? So it really is that sort of ongoing. First of all, you don't design any of this in isolation and then go to people. The design has to happen collaboratively as well, because there has to be sort of basic agreed upon tenets of what the issues are and what the strategies might be to address those issues. But secondly, in addition to sort of ensuring that there's collaboration from day one, you maintain that there's regular intervals of review and check-in. In our instance, for that particular project that I mentioned, we met on a monthly basis, especially in the beginning. We met for sure on a monthly basis. I was hired after the program was designed to some degree, but I continued to be involved with sort of the feedback and continuous improvement and evaluation of the program. We would meet monthly, like I said, especially in the first year, I believe it was. In the second year, I think we went down to probably having quarterly meetings, although there were certain partners that I met with more frequently, if they were depending on what their role was in the work that we were doing. And that was around 1999, early 2000. So it's been quite a while. But that was at a time when funders, very similar to the foundation that I work for now, Fairfield County's Community Foundation, started to understand that if we were really going to tackle these really big problems, we could no longer sort of go to one institution and say, you are the pregnancy prevention organization, so only you can do that. Because the problems were much more complex. There certainly were so many variables, making sure that young people had skills and they felt successful is much more of a pregnancy prevention strategy than just saying, here's birth control or don't have sex, right? And you need to have partners that reflect all of those sort of nuanced variables that contribute to whatever your problem is that you're trying to resolve.
I appreciate you sort of illustrating that in terms of that experience, and also helpful, as you said, just coming in and throwing money at something without thoughtful, careful strategy and planning. Then there's also no accountability, no way to check in, and a lot of probably wasted resources, people, time, and frustration. I'm going to jump ahead, Lutonya, if we can, to the Fairfield County Community Foundation. How does the community foundation differ, or what's kind of the, for people who don't know that, I know lots of communities have their own, but you sort of are a regional based one. How does Fairfield, or what's Fairfield County's, your foundation's vision or purpose, or how do they see who they serve? And again, in terms of working collaboratively with all the other organizations in Fairfield County.
What sets apart community foundations is that we are place-based. And as you mentioned, we are the entire county, but you do have some local, particularly I think it's New Canaan, has its own community foundation that only serves New Canaan and some of the immediate surrounding municipalities.
Right.
So that really is what sort of sets us apart from a family foundation or a corporate foundation or some of the other private foundations you may know of. We are truly place-based, and we are meant to be led by the community. So that means, and the way that looks, I should say, for us at the foundation is that we have regular communications with community partners. We, every 3 to 5 years, we do some research through our community wellness index to sort of understand what the issues are and the concerns are across the region. And then we develop strategies or think about our interventions based on that feedback from community and what the data tells us. Other foundations may say, we just happen to have a real interest in education, and irrespective of what community may say that they want or need, that foundation was founded because those folks who founded the foundation had a particular interest in that particular area. That's not necessarily the case with community foundations. They really are meant to be of the community and in response to community. And the other difference is we also allow people who might have assets that they like to use for philanthropic purposes. We allow them to create what we call donor advised funds, or DAFs, and we will manage those DAFs on their behalf. Rarely, there are no other foundations who really do that. That is very much unique to community foundations.
But takes advantage of your expertise and understanding of what's needed in the community.
Absolutely. Now, just so I can add some clarity to that as well, we don't control those assets. They're under management, but they're not under our control.
Right.
So you have a DAF and you may ask us, like you said, based on what you're hearing and your expertise, what are the things that you think might be timely for me to support? But ultimately, it is that individual's choice. And we can provide some guidance and information, but we have no control over what they choose to fund.
Right. And as you said, you mentioned some people or some organizations, as well as maybe private donors, are specific about an interest they might be hoping to achieve. Is there any limit in your scope in terms of things that you don't do, or you do? And again, kind of going back to that, like, are there other organizations in your space that are doing things really well that don't need your attention that you kind of steer clear of? Or is it really a matter of what comes out in your feedback every 3 to 5 years and redirecting your strategy?
There have been historically some areas where we funded them in the past, and then we say we don't fund them for a period of time, and then we sort of circle back and start to fund them again. And I would say the arts would be a good example of that. And during the early years of the foundation, art was an area that we very explicitly funded. And then we stopped funding, and we are now anticipating a new funding program for the arts come the late spring, early summer of next year. Now, what's different, though, is Fairfield County, we have been going through a strategic planning process. They were actually in the midst of that process when I was hired with the foundation 2.5 years ago. And we implemented that new strategic plan this past January. And we've centered race equity in our work, and particularly with the lens of systems change. So now we have 4 result areas, if you will, that we sort of focus on, but our real focus is supporting organizations that are doing the work towards systems change in that area. And so those areas are youth education, workforce development and entrepreneurship, or asset building, as we call it, both for young people and adults, housing and health. And so we are funding organizations that are doing work in those areas, but are also doing it with the mindset of, through a racial equity lens, but also with the mindset of how do we change these systems so that the folks that we're serving no longer need us to provide these kinds of interventions.
Right. They're putting you out. They're putting you out of a job.
Ultimately pulling us out of business.
Yeah,
yes.
you fix the problem. So, Lutonya, you mentioned when you came to the foundation, it was not in the role you're currently in. So can you talk a little bit about that one? Because I think now I'm seeing the picture of how it's kind of segued from prior experience that you had.
Yeah.
And I think might have been the connection point with HAYVN.
Yes. So I was hired back in May of 2021 as the Senior Director of the Fund for Women and Girls at the foundation. And because HAYVN was a woman-founded business and really sort of centered women entrepreneurs in the shared workspace, my predecessor had joined HAYVN as a member. And when I was hired, I continued to that membership because we thought it was really important for a couple of reasons. I think as the Fund for Women and Girls, obviously we're centering the needs of women and girls across the county. And we thought being in fellowship, if you will, with women entrepreneurs. And I know that HAYVN has folks who are not necessarily women, but the preponderance of their membership is certainly women. We just thought it made sense for us to be a part of that space. There's so many great offerings at HAYVN, and it really did allow us to sort of meet new people, hear different perspectives, but also help people understand what we do at the foundation. And if there were women who were so inclined to support the work that we were doing, that they would get to know us, and we could certainly, hopefully, engage them in what we were doing as well.
I love that. I was going to say, I'm selfishly excited that I get to talk to you for this exact reason, right? And learn more about the foundation. So that then shifted into your new role in terms of grants and programming, Vice President of Grants and Programs. Can you talk a little bit about that? You sound unbelievably thoughtful and coming out of a strategic plan, and with this new sort of lens or force on racial equity and systems change. Is that your guiding force every day? Does that change? How does that impact what you're doing with your work now?
It is the undercurrent of everything that we do, right? So we're constantly asking ourselves, we're in the middle of a grant cycle right now. So folks who have applied, we are asking questions of ourselves and of them is, how are you incorporating the voice of the community that you seek to serve? How are we being thoughtful in making sure that we are supporting those leaders who are most proximate to the communities that they wish to serve? Because we know historically those leaders are more often have the least access to capital and resources for their organizations. And they more often than not are the ones that are doing the work on the ground in the community. And so we often, we ask those questions. How are we showing up in community, and how are we humbling ourselves to hear what community has to say to us? We do not walk into the space sort of under the guise that we have all of the answers. More often than not, we're in that space to learn, but also as a partner. So it is a burden to often be the person teaching all the time. So we recognize that. We don't go into those spaces saying, tell us what to do or tell us what we don't know. But we recognize that we have relationships, whether they be national or statewide or regional, meaning regional from a state to state perspective, that we can bring information into our grantee partners to help inform their work. But we also very much respect that they are the best to tell us what the community needs, not the other way around.
I love the sort of the partnership as opposed to what might be seen as more of a hierarchy or an up and down, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm inspired. So you mentioned you're in the middle of a grant cycle. For people who are not familiar with, kind of how foundations and grants work, can you enlighten us a little bit about a grant cycle?
Yeah.
Like, is it annually? Is it quarterly? Does it depend on time to time? I'm trying to find out when you get a break, Lutonya.
It doesn't seem to be any time for breaks, but this can look differently from foundation to foundation, even from community foundation to community foundation. So I want to preface it by saying that. But for us, we have 2 grant cycles. We have a fall and a spring, and those are sort of misnomers because the fall cycle starts in July. And so beginning about mid-July, we open up our portal. And if you think that you want to apply for a grant, you complete what we call is a letter of intent. And that really is just sort of an abbreviated application to give us a general sense of what it is that you would like assistance with, and a little bit about your organization. And then we sort of take a couple of weeks in August to review those letters of intent, and we decide which organizations we wish to invite to apply for a full application. And the reason we do that is completing these applications take time and effort and resources.
Yeah, I mean, I've just heard anecdotally, I'm writing grants, or it's grant writing season, right? Like if you're on the other side.
And I've been on the other side.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate this approach.
Right.
And so rather than have you go through the full process, let's just get enough information to make somewhat of a judgment to see if there's alignment. And we really strive that if we invite you to the application, that we feel pretty good about your chances of getting funded. It does happen that people get invited to the full application and they get denied, but we really, really try to keep that to a minimal. That is a very small percentage of our grants because we've really done the work. We've had conversations with you about your letter of intent. We've asked some questions to give ourselves a sense of, does this make sense? Do we want to ask these folks to invest the time and effort that it takes to complete our full application? So that happens. They have from September 1st until September 30th to complete the application. We do site visits with applicants pretty much throughout October. And literally right before I came on with you, we have what we call our grant review. So we spend a couple of hours where each one of our program officers and their associates present the docket, as we call it, of organizations that they would like to fund. and we review the amounts and the organizations, and we do that as a group. Now, they do the individual review of the applications with the program associate, but as a group, as a full team, we have a conversation, because while the program officer is definitely an expert in their particular area, there may be somebody else in the room who's more familiar with the organization and might be able to offer a little context or color that that program officer may not have. And sometimes that could mean giving that particular applicant more funding because of that information. So once that happens, it then goes to our Community Impact Committee for review and approval, and then they make the recommendation to the board for funding. So that's the fall. And then we repeat all of that again comes January 15th.
Holy moly.
For the spring.
And a quick question again, thank you so much for your patience in explaining this. When the decisions are the decisions made all at the same time so you can see the whole picture?
Yes.
Or are they on because I would think that also is why you look at it as a group, right? Like
absolutely.
You kind of want to see, I won't say necessarily balance, but understand what the whole pie or picture looks like in that
absolutely
grant process. And then we're coming into the holiday season, right? Anecdotally, on a couple of the boards I sit in and are familiar with, we jokingly say, those annual appeals keep coming out sooner and sooner.
Yeah.
What does this time of year, I mean, your grant cycle obviously, look like for you, or just from your purview as a community foundation? Is this still the most important time of year for those organizations in need? Have you seen a shift in terms of how we're thinking about funding needs and making impacts in this community? I'm sure post-COVID, a lot has changed. I'm sure the way we do work, the way we give, and also being, I think, a little more familiar with all the needed change and help that has to happen. What does that look like from your world?
Wow, that's a really good question. So I'll answer it from two perspectives. From the perspective of the foundation, the work that we do needs funding as well. So we do our own appeal.
Yep.
We do our own fundraising. And we certainly do it this time of year because this is the time that people begin to make those decisions. Or I won't say that they begin to make those decisions, but they sort of look back on what their giving has been for the year, and they reflect on, did I meet the goals that I personally had in
right.
my own philanthropic efforts? I think from the nonprofit sector as a whole, COVID was really hard. And community, we all were experiencing that hardship together. And I think that was part of the reason why we saw this really huge uptick in folks giving, because everybody was feeling that. And they could certainly, even if you had tons of resources, it was still very hard. And so it was easier to probably think about, my goodness, if, a family has a little bit less, this must really be hard. I want to help.
Right.
In some ways, that was a really great thing, obviously. But I think what has happened is COVID feels a bit further away in the distance. And so the need is just as great, if not greater. Because those, how would I say, the disparities that we see in community were amplified because of COVID. And that amplification is still very much there. But the trends in giving have not followed suit. They were much more COVID specific and related than they have been in terms of continuing that trend. And so what we hear from a lot of organizations is the need is so deep and so much greater. And for some orgs, their giving the revenue that they're bringing in from philanthropy has really, when I say philanthropy, I don't mean just foundations, but donors and,
right.
and the like, that has shrunk a bit. And part of it, so the economy is what it is. And so I think too often when we think of donors and philanthropy, we think of people giving these huge gifts. But so much of our support comes from people who give, really moderate gifts. And as the pressures of the economy that we're in sort of begin to affect those individuals, their ability to give goes down. But the greater needs still remain. And so I would venture to say you've got a number of organizations that struggle to sort of meet their budget goals every year. And I think some of that is, like I said, as a direct result that people have a few less dollars in their own pockets. But I also think that there is this misconception that the giving that folks saw during COVID continued. And that's just really not the case.
I think you're bringing us to the call to action then.
Yes.
In terms of why we might be sitting here then. So, Lutonya, I think you've educated us on the amazing work you do, but you can't do your amazing work without funds and without organizations that continue to thrive and exist to do the work they do. So I think now we know this is a call to arms this time of year, that if we could give like we gave in COVID, that would be a great thing, because that's not what we're doing, right?
Absolutely.
It has been a pleasure speaking with you. If people want to learn more about the Fairfield County Community Foundation or you, what's the best way to reach out and connect?
Oh, please visit our website at fccfoundation.org. You can read all about sort of what our result areas are, what our new strategy is, and you can sign up for our newsletter so that you can be abreast of all of our activities. We have a number of things coming up. We have a new initiative with the Fund for Women and Girls. The Black Maternal Health Initiative has a big kickoff on November 13th. You can go to the website to learn more about that. We are going on the road. We're traveling to a number of communities so we can talk to community members so that they can ask questions, learn more about the work that we do at the foundation. We're calling those Fueling Conversations. And our first one is in Easton at Grier's Coffee Shop